And now, America's most reasonable political commentator, Bob Kerrigan.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Within Reason. Here's an interesting thing that most people I don't think know about, but in this country we have, I think, 1 million oil wells spread around the country. In Iraq, there are 2,000. They have deteriorated pipelines, rusted pipelines. They have broken down refineries, and they haven't begun to tap the enormous oil reserves that are in Iraq. And the multinational companies, now because the United States essentially controls the Iraqi government, working on contracts to award these multinational companies, the Iraqis, oil. This is a recipe for disaster. This is not going to hold. This is not going to last. The lull in place now, with some irony, the Republicans hoped would give them some peak of hope for 2008 for the election. There is no hope for the Republican Party. It's in massive disarray. It's really totally dysfunctional. Well, speaking of politicians, my favorite Mormon, I discussed the interesting beliefs of the Mormons last week. And I say interesting because here's a man who says, my faith is everything. He carries it on his shoulder, he has it on his sleeve, he has it on his ring, he has it on his every place he can put it. And yet he won't actually talk about what Mormons believe. I mean, why can't we just bring it out? I mean, whatever a Mormon believes, let's talk about what the Mormons believe. What's the problem? Catholics talk about what Catholics believe in. Methodists talk about what Methodists believe in. What's the problem with the Mormons? The Mormons want to talk in kind of generalized faith talk. They have great faith and they care about families. I think all those things are probably true, but the question is, what are their core beliefs? And if he's reached the informed and educated conclusion that he believes certain tenets of the Mormon faith, then I think it's a fair game to say, how could any rational person or reasonable person believe these things? And then if you do believe those and you reach this conclusion that you've reached, doesn't it pose a question about your judgment? I mean, why isn't that fair game? I don't get it. So if you're interested in more about the Mormon Church and what they believe, you can go to this website. There it is, the Utah Lighthouse Ministry, and offers some observations about the Mormon Church. Wasn't this amusing on the Democratic debate? Sponsored by the Coal Institute. They sponsored the Democratic debate. And all these coal guys were just laughing, propping their feet up, drinking a beer, roaring at the liberal Democrats, and they're paying for them with these feel-good coal commercials about how we're working to burn our coal in the best fashion that we can because it's our largest natural resource, and it means so much to little mom and her children and all of the children as they plug in their little plugs for their computers, all for coal, and how grateful we should be that coal is so wonderful in this country. It's a nasty, dirty, stinking, polluting burning of that stuff that we got to stop. And there's been no incentive. The Bush administration for over 7 years, they could give a hoot about this, okay? The Southern Company, the worst offender. The worst offender. Some guy called me and said, give me some hard statistics on it. I mean, you know, what are you talking about? And it's the power companies that are the big guns on tort reform. They fight like the devil behind the scenes to keep you and your family from bringing any kind of claim against any corporation, regardless of the magnitude of the harm that they do you or your family. They're big on it. They don't want claims to be made by people that are injured against corporations, and these power companies are leading the way doing it. Now they've got the Supreme Court, and they've got the Supreme Court solidly on their side. So people who say, I'm so proud of Alito and Roberts, isn't it great that we have these conservative justices? Forget all of this activist business. It's all nonsense. It's all scrambled up jargon to try to make you think that some judges are bad and some judges are good. To suggest that conservatives are less activists is just a nonsense. No support for it. Never has been any support for it. But with these two justices, now they've swung it over, just knocked out the claims against Enron. Supreme Court today dismissed a huge lawsuit growing out of the Enron debacle that sought to hold Wall Street bankers liable for scheming with the executives of the defunct Houston energy trader, lawyers for investment funds and pension plans, including the University of California's pension plan. Now, these are pension plans, your pension plans, okay? They're going to walk free, and they stole your pension money. Now, aren't you proud? You're a conservative, and you support corporate powers. Aren't you proud of that? You've been duped. Conservatives have been duped over simple things like abortion. They hooked you in. They said, we'll be pro-life. Just let us steal everything that isn't nailed down. Let us screw over the public. Let's prevent people from bringing lawsuits. Let people like Kenny Lay and Enron, let them steal everything. We just don't want to hold them responsible. The United States Supreme Court said, no. Can't do it. They're walking. They're out. And I want to say a word about our Latin American neighbors, our friends from Mexico. And really, I'm kind of tired of the rednecks talking about the illegals, like they're some kind of dirt. I mean, these people who came here, nobody was checking their cards then because we needed the labor. And nobody checks the cards of these big-time Republican businessmen that have been bringing in Mexican labor forever in the border states. Nobody's ever talked about it. No one wants to talk about it. That's the big fight, in the Republican Party, is that it's a huge source of labor for Republican businessmen. So when we hear this talk about how John McCain is weak and won't build giant fences or whatever, this is a hugely complex problem. And McCain is a reasonable person. He said, you shouldn't force somebody who's a grandmother, who's 75, who's lived here for 20 years, to get on a bus and go back to Mexico. This is a complex problem. So when we want to and that's the problem with the redneck conservative. Crystal clear. Put them on a bus, send them back. Okay? Protect our borders. That's what we got to do. These are hugely complex problems. So when Democrats talk about these problems, and I think John McCain to an extent talk about these problems, they understand the complexity of the problem, and then they're characterized as soft, easy, where the real tough guys, the Sean Hannitys of this world and the Rush Limbaughs, boy, they've got all the answers. Of course, they couldn't manage a church square dance, okay? That's a fact. All they get to do is talk. They talk for a living, and they get paid to talk. I didn't tell you all about the best story tonight that I had. In a damning report, we're going to put this website up in a second, the Center for Public Integrity found 935 false statements by 8 top administration officials that mentioned Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction or links to al-Qaeda on at least 532 separate occasions. There's the website, okay? Bush and 7 of his administration top officials methodically propagated erroneous information over the 2 years beginning on September 11th. They could hardly wait, 2001. These false statements dramatically increased in 2002, just prior to congressional consideration of a war resolution and during the critical weeks in early 2003, when the President delivered his State of the Union address and Powell delivered his memorable presentation to the UN Security Council. The study calls into question the repeated assertions of Bush administration officials that they were merely the unwitting victims of bad intelligence. Within reason, Bob Kerrigan, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for your calls, your emails, and your comments. And for all of our callers tonight, we appreciate you calling in. See you next week.